Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I'm aware that there's a lot of different meetings going on here. And for me, skill is an important agenda, something very close to my heart, and I like to promote that wherever I go. I consider this as an important forum, and therefore very important to speak about it. To begin with, I'm quite sure that many of you would have heard the word demographic dividend, which is very commonly spoken. What might surprise you is that demographic dividend has a window. It's called a window of opportunity, which lasts for about 40 to 50 years. That's all. And if you look at different countries in the world, in 1960, South Korea had their window of opportunity, the demographic window of opportunity. In 1980, China had theirs, and it actually ends in 1920. So far as India is concerned, we are having that from somewhere between 2005 to 2010, and it's going to last us to maybe about 2050. Now this 40, 50 years of period is very critical for the growth of a country, for the reason that number of people who are earning during this period far exceeds the number of people who are dependent on earning. And if you could get your acts right during this period, ensure higher level of labor productivity, you go to a completely new trajectory of growth. And that's what we aim for when we talk of Skill India. The whole idea of Skill India is to ensure that during this period of 40, 45 years, we ensure that the labor and capital, which leads to the GDP of a country, is growing into another trajectory simply because the human capital index of the country changes, and therefore the importance of Skill India in general. Now, coming to some of the things we have done from the National Skill Development Corporation side as a public-private partnership in which we are working with Government of India together. The first challenge has been that there was no ecosystem which focused on skills. And therefore, the idea was, can we create one which was sensitive to the market? And therefore, looking at the corporate world and the demand, and checking out what is there which is needed, and then what shall we create. So what has happened over, let's say, from 2009 to 2016, is that we have more than 40 sector skill councils at the moment. That ranges from mundane ones, for example, construction, to welding, to media and entertainment, to beauty and wellness, to apparel, to even sports. So we have all kinds of sector skill council which has grown over the years. And each of them now have something called qualification packs. These are job roles which we have defined. Job roles defined in consultation with industry, because that's where the industry is looking for manpower. That's where the industry feels that they lack enough skilled worker. And the first, therefore, the work that we did was in consultation with international agencies, in consultation with our own industry, create those basic standards which were missing. So if you were to look for welders today, then what is the level of skills that he needs, whether we want to employ him within India or outside India? So therefore, a qualification pack actually defines that. And that's been developed in fairly detailed level. We have more than 510 job roles which are live. We actually made about 1,700. Later we realized that many of them are relatively exotic, not so much of demand, but they are there for anybody to pick up as they want. Now this was the first part of it. As we go along, what we find is a challenge that how do a plumber, or for that matter, somebody who's become a welder, or somebody who dropped out, let's say, from class 10 and went into beauty and wellness, how does he or she now relate themselves maybe 3 years, 4 years down the line to somebody who went into regular academia? Because one of the problems that we have found with Skill India is that it doesn't inspire people. It doesn't really become aspirational for most of them. They think that only when you drop out from a school or you drop out from a college that you have to go to some of these vocations. That's the kind of thinking which is existing. And that's probably because once you are out of it, then coming back to mainstream takes you to go back down to the same point from where you actually left it. So there is a big change which is occurring now in this space. Something called National Skill Qualification Framework, which is being developed. Now, everybody who sits in this room can actually be classified under NSQF from level 1 to level 10. So level 1 is the lowest, and level 10 is the highest. When you are level 10, you are a PhD. When you are level 1, you are somebody raw, just entering into labor force with some level of knowledge about that particular sector, but not deep enough, not yet there in terms of skills. So as you move up the skill ladder, I would normally think that the skills, which is the vocational part, and the academics, both can move up. At the level of 6 or 7, both of them can seamlessly merge into each other. So somebody who might have had 3 years of experience of, let's say, plumbing after class 10, actually under the new NSQF would have certain credits which he can actually take forward, and doing a small bridge course, which might last for a few months, become class 12 pass. And therefore, he doesn't lose time simply because of the fact that he had to drop out. Now, if you look at India, we don't represent India, frankly. If you look at India, 22% live below poverty line. And those who live above poverty line, but below twice the poverty line, they are almost 54%. So this huge number, 22 plus 54, that's 76% of India, are the ones who are most affected because of the lack of seamlessness between vocational training and the formal education that is what we normally see in our society and normally we aspire for in society. So this is a type of change which is coming in, to which NSDC is also contributing, and Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship is very strongly pursuing to ensure that these 76% of people who often have to drop out because of the economic conditions can come back to regular mainstream of academia and then maybe carry on with their life to next levels depending upon how they want to go and what is their ambition in life. Now, getting back to a little bit of details on what NSDC does. So if I were to look at what we do, we churn out, in simple terms, about 10,000 skilled people across 40 sector skill councils, more than 10,000 every day, every working day. So that's what we do. And we have about 250 private training partners, which run more than 5,000 centers across India. And they are the ones who are spread out across all the sector skills councils that I was mentioning. There are 40 of them. Now, the way we support them is twofold. When we started this whole concept, the idea was to provide soft loans to them, and the soft loans would go, 75% of the soft loan would come from the NSDC, 25% from the private sector, and then they would set up a proper training institution, which was a fee-based model. So they would charge fees for that. And some of them have done excellently. However, there has been a big change recently. Initially, if you look at the early years, the average expenditure on skills would be something like 500 crore per annum. If you look at the budget today, the last budget approved about 11,000 crores in skills. And it's a huge amount of money which is now coming in. Now, this is coming differently. The new money which is coming in is coming through the subsidy route. So we have now two channels of funding. One which comes as a loan, as a soft loan, and then you create a fee-based model. The other one which comes as subsidy, and that is aimed essentially at the 76% of the population that I was mentioning. At least the majority of them should be below the 76%, though it's not really mentioned specifically in the policy in that sense. So these are the two styles or direction from which the money is coming in. The money which comes as subsidy is popularly known as Prime Minister's Kausal Vikas Yojana, and we have had one round of it last year, which didn't go too well, but there has been good learning out of that. And we have now the second version of Prime Minister's Kausal Vikas Yojana that has been rolled out from 2nd of October, and that's now actually gradually picking up speed. Few of the concerns that we have had, taking the soft loans as well as the subsidy-based model. The first one is the fact that the quality has often been questioned, and that's been a matter of concern for us. The quality is critical because industry would not respond if you did not create quality when it comes to skilling. Eventually, it's about how the industry responds to a person that has been churned out from a skill industry and then goes there to be employed in any of these sectors, and what is his level of productivity. If it is not too high, then obviously it doesn't inspire them. So we have been very concerned about complaints on quality, and the next round of PMKVY has been very, very strong on quality. The monitoring of the fee-based model also we have increased to ensure that we become more quality conscious and ensure that quality comes in at a different level altogether. Though I would also admit that the fee-based model actually have much higher quality compared to the subsidy model. That's something which what we have witnessed. Now, second thing which I think is very important to understand is the risk which the private sector often feels when it comes to this business of skills. In a recent meeting of our training partners about 2 weeks back, I was asking a question that what is the rate of return which you would normally expect if you're putting money into the skill industry. And 70% of them responded saying that they expect a return of 15 to 20%, and 30% actually said they want 20, 25% or even more. That was their expectation. It's extremely high. The immediate understanding of that response, and that was an anonymous polling that we did of all the training partners, so none of them were identifiable as such. But the immediate understanding which emerged from that is that the training partners see skilling as a very risky business. And that is probably because there is a high level of dependence of money flowing from the government, and the fact that the government policies often change, and the instability in the policy creates fear in the mind that will my investments be safe. So one of our requests recently to Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship has been to create a regulator which ensures fairness or a fair play ground for the private sector when they are putting in money. When we look at the overall investment levels so far, it's not been too high. About, in the fee-based model, if I look at it, about 1,000 crores put in by government and 500 by the private sector. And there's another 1,000 committed by government, another 500 committed by the private sector, which is not too high. But if we were to increase this amount, I think it's very important that we have to look at the risk perception of the private sector and do something about that. Another challenge has been that there is an expectation that every time somebody is skilled, he gets a job. Now, that's not really practical, because not everybody will eventually end up with jobs. So what we have been talking lately, and we have been talking to some of the best minds in the country on that issue, with lead being taken by Mr. Subrato Bakshi, formerly of Mindtree and currently leading Skill Mission in Odisha, is the need for creating entrepreneurs and putting money on entrepreneurship. The challenge here is that the government itself would not be wanting to put money on an issue where normally 80% of people fail. 80% of entrepreneurs actually fail, as we know from our common understanding. Now, public money getting into something where 80% rate of failure occurs is highly, highly unlikely. So Mr. Bakshi has come up with a very good idea of ensuring that we get money from the private sector for entrepreneurship, promote micro-entrepreneurship, not the higher ones where you could actually approach somebody like IDFC or even any of the regular banks to get money. But it's the micro-entrepreneurs that will be focused through the channel that he's thinking of, more like a social impact investment funds. And we are talking to several partners like iCreate and others who understand this business of how do you mentor micro-entrepreneurs. And that's the next level to which we are going. Also, another thing that we are lately working on, which we have found as a challenge also, is the need that the need to scale up, and the fact that you have to expand to areas which are not easy to easy to reach. So we are planning to use technology in a big way. We are in touch with virtual reality groups like the Eon Reality in Los Angeles and others who create a virtual training ground in which actually this room could be converted into a rig through the mechanism that they apply. And you could actually be working on a rig virtually. And once you have worked on that, when you go to the real rig, you have a better understanding of what a rig is like. The advantage of such kind of training is that you don't make mistakes in a very expensive equipment. Equipments can be extremely expensive, and if you lack the basics about it, it can be really troublesome. So new technologies that are coming up, which is going to make a difference. So these were a few thoughts which I wanted to share with you today, this morning, and I actually look forward to support from IDFC and other corporate partners who are present here today in terms of skilling and any contribution that you can make, whether it could be towards skill development itself, or it could be towards entrepreneurship, or even understanding of where our skill ecosystem is heading. Particularly because I think there is a fear in the minds of many that skill, I often find the government, particularly state governments, very worried that are we pouring money into the right stuff? And therefore there is a need for confidence in them that it is actually going in the right direction. That kind of signal only can become credible if it comes from the private sector, because they are the ones who are going to utilize the end product of skilling. So there are various methods by which one could do that, but that's something which perhaps I would deal in question and answer. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for listening to me. Thanks.
So I'll throw the floor open for some questions.
Good morning, sir. Thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us. My question was, you mentioned that the skilling budget for this year is 11,000 crores. Of that, how much is in capacity creation as against subsidy?
So the way it works is that first is 11,000 crore is the subsidy which comes from the government. And for a PMKVY center, the way it is designed, you would normally have to spend about 10 to 20 lakh upfront. That's from the investor side. Once you have made your investments, that particular center is visited by Quality Council of India to check for quality, and thereafter you are given clearance to enroll people. Now the subsidy of Government of India is purely for the number of people whom you train. So you get about 15,000 rupees for every person that you train for 300 hours. That's average I'm talking of. So it's more like you are putting in the fixed capital, and it's the Government of India which is giving you the operating capital for that, and that also accounts for the profit that you get out of that.
That helps. And the second question was, you partly alluded to this when you were talking. You mentioned that NSDC is currently churning out 10,000 odd skilled manpower every day. How much of them actually are able to find jobs in the current
so that's very interesting, because we found, as I said, the subsidy-based ones get only about 10% of the ones who are trained through subsidy get jobs. But in the fee-based model, about 60% of them get jobs. That's what we have observed. However, there is also a body of research which essentially says that when you enter a labor market, particularly when you are new, there is an information asymmetry of your capacity between the ones who is going to hire you and your own ability to reflect your skillfulness. So what happens is, a labor market employer would normally hire a person who is unemployed or who is unskilled, as well as somebody who is skilled at the entry level at the same rate. It's only after he has employed him for maybe 6, 7, 8 months that he realizes the skilled person is giving him more productivity, and therefore he begins to increase his wages. Unfortunately, we have not done that research in India to get a sense that how much is the differential that occurs over time, and there is a need for such kind of research. We have been requesting the World Bank to help us in doing that. Also, we have spoken to IIM Bangalore to conduct research on that, we would be more certain of what is the gain to a person who is skilled only after we do those kind of research. At the moment, it's a little bit of fluid environment.
Could you also help us in terms of some medium-term targets? Where do you think this 10,000 number per day is going to increase to? What is the skilling budget likely to be in next 2-3 years?
The skilling budget for next few years is going to be about 32,000 crore overall. This is for the next 4 years, which includes, as I said, the PMKVY, but there is also the Apprenticeship Act, where the industry, for every person they hire, they get about 15,000 rupees as a subsidy. So that's another program of Government of India that's ongoing. So when we add all of them, it's about 32,000 crore. That's the money which will come in for next 4 years.
And in terms of number of skilled manpower?
The number of skilled manpower that we aim to have in next 4 years is 1 crore. 1 crore people to be trained.
Next 4 years put together?
Yeah, next 4 years.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for taking time out for this. So a couple of things that I wanted to understand from you. One was on the Apprenticeship Act. What was the thesis behind designing a structure like this? Because from what I've understood from some of your vendors who are providing these services, is that it is a tool getting used by a lot of corporates to employ people without giving them the benefits of ESIC, pension, etc. So it's just a tool that they use to work around that. So there are two things to it. One, it gives the eventual beneficiary more cash in hand. So a lot of labor is more happy because of that. But then it's also getting misused in terms of it's used as a tool to move around the law. The second piece was some of your vendors who are setting up centers have concerns that a lot of states don't disburse the eventual money on time. So that works as a big disincentive for them to expand. Though the willingness is there, the largest challenge is, will the money from the states come on time? And these delays go up to as much as 6-7 months. So that works as a big disincentive. So is that something that we're working on to ensure that once the disbursements are in place, you will see a lot of participation from the private sector as well?
Thank you. On the first question, which is about apprenticeship, the model that we are following is the German model. If you look at the German model, which is supposed to be the most successful model in terms of skilling, we have apprenticeship, and there is on-the-job training, which occurs for almost 2-3 years before a person is certified as fit to get into the job market. We in India are following a different method, which is the short-term skilling. There is, of course, the ITI, which has been there existing for a long time, but has not been that successful. The short-term itself has arisen because of two reasons. One is the demand from industry that they need people quickly. They need people quickly for something which is immediate, and they don't require a person to be, let's say, 2-year trained. They just want 3 years training on some specific aspects of welding or something, and then coming to the job force. On the other hand, if you look at the people who we are aiming for, who our customers are, it's mostly the people who are below poverty line or above poverty line, but below twice the poverty line, as I was saying. So now if these are the people, when you talk to them, they say that we just don't have time for 1 or 2 years of training. We have time for 3 months. That's the maximum which we can manage, because they have to lead the life, day-to-day life, with a lot of struggle. So the advantage of plugging the two is that you do 3 months of short-term training, and then get into an an apprenticeship mode with some of the corporates. So you had a training which is 3 months, you got some skills using that, but thereafter you got into the on-the-job training, and there is a benefit which comes to the corporate world because of that thing. Now, so far as misuse is concerned, yeah, there has been misuse in the past. That could be said about many other things. But I guess the motive behind it is very genuine, and there has been changes in Apprenticeship Act just to ensure that the corporates gain, but they don't play with the rule in such a way that the person who is coming into it, they face difficulty. So that's the first part of your question. The second is the delay which comes in disbursement. So I think there is now this is a genuine kind of problem which I have noticed. Like, there are many other government departments which also do skill training. So for example, I think there is DUGKY from Rural Development Department or Rural Ministry, Development Ministry, and then you have Textile Ministry which does its own skilling. So firstly, there is an effort to converge all of them at one place, and that process is going on so that everything gets standardized and is actually flowing from one source. Secondly, at least so far as NSDC is concerned, we are trying to make everything online. So our effort at this moment is to make everything online. There will be no human interaction that actually delays money flow. So 30% of the money goes right at the start when you begin your training, and 50% when the person who passes. So we have a 30, 50 and 20. That's the formula which we have. 30 going as soon as you start the training or as soon as your training kicks in. 50 after your person has been trained and he's been assessed and certified, and then the remaining 20 when he gets employment. So that's the way we have done it, and all the three will be online. So there is nothing which happens offline. You put in data into our SDMS that we call Skill Development Management System, and then once you put your data in that, it responds to that data. There would be people who do checks in the background, but I mean, there is not. The idea is to reduce the layers which actually causes delay. But I think that's a very important point, that going forward we have to make that happen quicker for private sector to respond. Otherwise, I mean, it does cause loss to the business, because you can't retain good trainers for very long if they are not doing some work. So that's a very genuine concern.
Just a follow-up to that, you mentioned that 20% is paid on employment. So the onus of providing employment will be on the service provider?
So you could look at it this way. It's like a bonus that you get. You could think of the 80% as the mark and 20 extra that you get because you help the guy get either employment, or you tied up with somebody who could get him an employment, or you could get him into wage employment, self-employment. And you could actually get him towards Mudra loan. You could guide him towards that. So all of them count. Self-employment also counts. But the idea is that carrying him through the whole chain, because you are helping to mobilize him first, then to train him, and then to lead him towards a life that should be the outcome of this whole chain. And therefore 20% money is that extra kick which is there to ensure that the training partners are interested in the eventual outcome and do not stop simply at skilling.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, sir. My question centers around the demand-supply mismatch in terms of skill set in the country, more around the physical divide. Say, for instance, we say that 80% of the jobs are there in the metros and tier 1s, while the supply side is more in the tier 2 and tier 3 towns. So any thoughts on that would be helpful to understand.
That's right. So we do a skill gap study, and we do a skill gap study for every district of the country. So at the moment, we are actually aware. Obviously, this data can be only as good as is possible. We have done this study through some of the reputed institutions. But we would know that which of the districts have excess manpower and which are likely to migrate, and which are the districts where actually people would be needed for particular skills. And we know it sector-wise. So fairly detailed kind of understanding around which we build our strategy. Firstly that. Secondly, if you look at recent World Bank studies, you will find that the cities are going to be the drivers of India's growth. So there is no avoiding cities and towns, frankly. So there would be people who will come out from rural area. What you find is the number of people who are in agriculture is actually decreasing rapidly. There is an explosion of people in the service sector, more of them going there. The manufacturing sector has more or less remained steady, and some of the projection that shows that it may actually decline because of automation. Although there is another belief that perhaps a new skill set will be required, and we have to be prepared in that direction. So it could be either way. So therefore, I think we are mindful of that, and I don't think so we can avoid growth in towns and cities. They are the ones who will actually drive India's economy.
Thank you, sir.
I wanted to get your thoughts on whether there is any provision for training the trainers, because one of the assumptions is that there is adequate supply of appropriate trainers.
So a very, very important question, because eventually the diffusion of knowledge will occur through trainers. And if you didn't have a good trainer, then what is the knowledge that you diffuse? It doesn't help. So we have these 40 sector skill councils, which are essentially private sector bodies. And they are the ones who have the responsibility of training the trainers. And they have the master trainers with them. They have identified, let's say if you talk of media and entertainment, then who are and we have, let's say, 10 job roles in media and entertainment. For each of the job roles, who are the master trainers in this country? They are the ones who identify. And then, before, let's say, a PMKVY center begins to become functional, the person who is a trainer there, even though he already has some capacity on media and entertainment, that particular job role, is actually comes to a central location where there is retraining or basically upskilling of that person, so that he becomes a better trainer. And then he goes back and does the training. So we are mindful of this. In fact, we are also developing centers of excellences across country, and there are lots of labs that we are developing where you get really sophisticated equipments and people who are extremely trained and highly accomplished in that particular sector, who therefore function as the master trainer or super master trainers, training the master trainers, who then go down to the field and train other trainers. So it's a whole chain that we are trying to develop. But we are very, very mindful of this particular aspect, because training is only as good as the people who are in that field.
So is there anybody else?
Good morning, sir. Thanks for taking my question. So I think the Skill India is a very good program when we look at the demographic dividend. But most of the programs that are run generally face implementation issues in our country, because we are a diverse country and there are other legacy issues in our country. And you mentioned that the first wave of rolling out Skill India was not so successful, and now you're implementing the learnings of first wave. So just wanted to get more color on the kind of learnings you had and how you're implementing them, would be one question. And the second question would be, we have increased the budget from 500 crore to 11,000 crore, which will further go on to 32,000 crore. Now, thing here is, you get budgets, but it's difficult to use them entirely because there are not many avenues and the implementation becomes a challenge. So if you could give some more color on implementation and how we would make it successful, because I think eventually that becomes the key, it would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the first part, I think when we generally think of India, I think it always helps if you think of it as a continent, not as a country, because it's so varied and so big, and therefore you really need to adapt quickly. The good thing about PMKVY, and particularly the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, is that I have worked for many years in government. I have seen many programs, and I know that programs have different capability. There's a good intention there, but when it comes to implementation, there is often a challenge at the field level. This is one ministry which actually began to learn lessons on the very first year and quickly changed it in second. Normally it takes a ministry 5 years, 6 years, 7 years to realize something is failing. So I think in that sense it's a very good startup ministry which quickly picks up its lesson and then rebalances the policy. Now few of the things which emerged, and that's quite interesting, is the focus on quality. The fact that the first one had not led to good quality, and therefore the number of people who got employment was between 10 to 15%, so which obviously is not something which satisfies. But the new one is highly, highly focused on quality, so much so that many people are complaining that have you raised the bar too much? And neither we nor the ministry is actually willing to lower the bar at the moment. We say that if you want to really get good people, then you need to keep skill high up there and ensure that people who come out of it are really good. So therefore the focus on that is very, very clear. The second part of your question was about money, right? And that we are increasing from 500 to 10,000 or 11,000 and then to 32,000. So what was your concern on that?
So my point is that when you increase the budget by that kind of quantum, the avenues to spend usually run out. So at times the budget goes unused. So I just wanted to understand if we have that kind of avenues to use. I mean, I'm sure we have, but like you said, implementation becomes a challenge. So that was my concern here.
Yeah, so I think in this case, one of the learning which also occurred was the need to engage state governments. And therefore, part of the money of this is going through the state government also. So 25% of the money will go through state government. 75% of the money is going through the National Skill Development Corporation with the leadership of Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. So far as we are concerned, NSDC, I think we are quite well prepared and we have a clue of what we are trying to do. We have been in this business for 5-7 years. We know how fast the things can move. Quality, obviously, you see the speed and quality can often conflict, but we are trying to ensure that if we have to be slow in the beginning, we'll be slow, but we want to send a signal of quality. So probably we'll miss our target for expenditure as well as number of people whom we'll train for this year, but that's not concerning us at this point. We are thinking that we will achieve that next year, provided we ensure that we send the right signal this year and ensure that the best quality is there in the market. So far as preparedness of NSDC is concerned, we are quite okay. We are quite okay. We are expanding quite rapidly actually because we realize the need. We realize the need for expanding to handle this kind of money. So from maybe a very lean kind of 80 plus kind of people managing whole of India with a lot of technology in the background, we have actually expanded to almost 200 by now, with a lot of young people actually joining us. And it's very interesting that I think this is the first time in my career of 20 to 25 years that I have actually been asking people to slow down. Because if you call my office at 3 a.m. in the night, you find somebody is working. So I've been asking that if you work so much, you'll burn yourself out. And, but that shows the energy and also the commitment of the younger generation who are leading this.
That's helpful, sir. Thank you.
I have one question. So in terms of employment generation, that has been fairly weak, and in terms of gaps, there are too many. And what you are training is the level of very basic training requirements. So in between the unorganized and the organized sector, how do the opportunities present themselves? And where do you see maximum opportunities for these people to find employment?
See, the way I look at employment is market response to incentive. Now, if you look at the way incentive is organized, 20% was in employment, about 30%, and therefore the market only planned for the 70% in the PMKU1. They just forgot about the remaining 30 because they felt that was too difficult. So what we are trying to do now is to create a market between the training provider and people who place and who are in the business of employing people. There are lots of people I find, actually we find a lot of people who come independently to us saying that we need certain number of, let's say, a certain number of masons, a certain number of welders. They come independent, they don't go to the training provider. So there is a mismatch, there is a disconnect between the demand and the supply. And the ones who are training are not so interested in the remaining 30% because they feel that this is a difficult job for them. And they simply let it go in a way. And they try to develop a business model which is based on the 70% of money, which also implies that the quality of training goes low. So therefore, what we have been trying this year is to ensure a connect between the ones who are demanding. So people from Gulf, for example, There's one person from Gulf who says that he can employ 5,000 people per month if on various construction which is happening in Qatar at this point of time, and he just needs people. And there is another part of us who has huge number of people and he's looking who can employ. So we are now connecting the two from both the sides and ensuring that the markets meet there. And we have told them that it's between you two guys now to divide that 20%. How would you like to divide? It's your contractual business, not ours. But that 20% moves because of your cooperation. And that's the way we are planning to go forward. We actually have plans for about 20 such, we call it Rozgar Melas in UP, for example, in this month. And that's where the trained people who are trained and people who are looking for trained people, both of them converge. And last time we did this in Varanasi, we found about 2,500 people got employed in one single day. And this time we have one in Kanpur, where I think about 5,000 employment demand has come up, and there are people more than obviously 5,000 out there. So there's a lot of supply and demand that we are trying to put together at this point of time.
So from your perspective, a lot of this employment opportunities are coming from unorganized sector?
Yeah, it is from our unorganized sector. I mean, in India, I think if you look at the organized sector in that very typical sense, it's a very small component of the overall ecosystem. It's only about 6 to 7% of the total labor force that is in the organized sector. Most of them is in the unorganized sector, or we could call it semi-organized sector. It's not fully organized. So it's mostly contractual, but it's a weak contract in a way. Whereas organized would be highly contractual, highly structured, and that's where, in fact, we also want Apprenticeship Act to go forward to. But most people will get into unorganized sector in many ways.
ILO 181, which ensures that a lot of contractual labor, the vendors who are hiring the contractual laborers need to be licensed. Right? Do you think an act like that can prevent, one, the misuse, which one of the earlier questions that indicated, and second, the ability, the seamlessness between the demand and supply? Because the countries which have adopted that have seen significant increase, at least in the temp staffing, and which is an area where semi-skilled labor gets employed the most.
So the first part of your question, as I understand, is about the ability of regulation to make unorganized into organized. So this I feel is always a process, and there is a need for that's a business which perhaps has to start from an activism role of NGOs and others, which might be important out here. Because if you look at India, there's enough laws. There's enough laws. The problem is the supply is so high that the organized sector therefore finds it easier, because of the supply, to always get some people who are vulnerable, relatively vulnerable. And even if you look at, let's say, domestic labor, I mean, how many of people who actually have domestic helps actually give them leave? I mean, you find many of them not giving them leave. There is no proper contractual agreement with them, which ideally we should have. And that's violation of law, strictly speaking. So is with your driver. Many of us employ a driver, and they're skilled people, and we are supposed to have a contract with them. They're supposed to work 8 hours, not more than that. These are all part of law. But there is lack of enforcement of this law, simply because there are too many drivers, and if somebody begins to say that, can you follow rules for me, you will say, okay, let's change him. So I think it's a behavior change part, the challenge of changing behavior in the society, which I guess requires a completely different level of working, and a different set of people who should pursue that, for sure. It's not something which we should take forward with us 20 years from hence. For 20 years from hence, we should look for a society where vulnerable people are also protected by contracts and are not left completely unorganized.
Thank you, sir. I had one question with regards to the demand and supply gap that you are talking about. why don't we employ HR staffing agencies which has been developing? To name a few, for example, Team Lease, which basically matches, aggregates the demand from the private sector and then looks for people who can fill in those positions. So instead of giving that 10% of the money to the service providers who initially don't want to work for the 10%, only for the 90% as you mentioned, deploy the 10% with these HR agencies, and so that the placement and the job goes up predominantly for the people who are going through these trainings.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good idea. In fact, Team Lease is part of our overall ecosystem, and in fact the Rozgar Melas that I'm talking of in UP, they are the ones who are leading it. So they are contributing hugely to this, and there are other partners also and the same type of business who are leading that. So far as tweaking the policy itself to lead in that direction, I think that's a very good idea. We believe in that, but I think it's a process of advocacy. So there is a particular way in which the policy has been designed for some reason, and there would have been discussion, debates on that. But as we go forward, we would want to push in that direction as an advocacy, that this whole ecosystem has three parts. One is mobilization, second is skilling, and the third is the placement. And so therefore, there should be three different players on that. The mobilization being done by one set of people, the skilling by the training partners, and the final hiring of those by types of team leads who actually have the knowledge of placement and are in that business, and therefore would have interest as well as expertise for that. So that's the long-term goal even we want to pursue from our side. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we are reaching the end of our time. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And thank you so very much for giving us your views on this. And I hope you would meet your end objectives fairly quickly.